So welcome to the second or third or fourth, depending on how we count, webinar in this PSME process study webinars. And we are going to have Marty Rolfe present CalWater 2, which is the Precipitation, Aerosol, and Pacific Atmospheric River Experiment. And Marty is the director of the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes, CW3E, at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, UC San Diego. He has his BS in meteorology from University of Arizona at Tucson in '84, and then in MS and PhD in atmospheric sciences from UCLA in '87 and '91. And I will let Marty start.
Thank you, Gad, and thanks for the chance to share this, and very happy to take any questions as people have them. My understanding is the briefing here is really about familiarizing the committee with recent field experiment that's taken place and some of its basis, the team involved, what we've done, and a little bit about where we may be headed. And I'll say this is all in a context of background in my field, or in my career, of having really had a focus on observational studies and mesoscale dynamics and optic scale, with an emphasis on phenomena in atmospheric sciences that affect the water cycle, with a focus on precipitation. So CalWater is an experiment, a program of field studies is actually what we call it, and I'll give you a reason for that in just a moment. We have a steering committee I'll introduce you to in just a moment in terms of a more complete table, but you see them listed there as well. So let's see, go ahead. What are we going after in terms of what motivated CalWater? A key challenge is with changes in climate, projected, particularly with effects on water, and with California as an example of where those effects are strong, and there's a lot of policy interest and challenging science questions. There's been a lot of attention on this kind of result right here, which is shown from Dettinger 2005, and there's a more recent version with a more updated IPCC kind of thing. But it goes from 1900, the graph, to 2100, and you see the anomaly in centimeters per month of rainfall in Northern California. And this is a particularly important area for a state that has a huge economy. And if you look at the historical period, where the calibration's going on, it's not bad. And then you see the spread generating out in the future with a mean that's not far different from what the current average is. However, there's a lot of variation among the ensemble members here and the different models, and that's a source of great concern for water managers and policymakers in the region. And a more recent result is from Pierce et al. In Journal of Climate 2013, shows that the differences between the models in terms of this precipitation is largely a result of the wettest days of each year and how the models are handling those. And as you'll see in a moment, California's precipitation on average is affected strongly by this phenomena known as atmospheric rivers that transports huge amounts of water vapor and causes a lot of precipitation. So in a way, what the climate modeling studies have shown is that a lot of this variance is a result of how different models handle this particular phenomena. Now, the committee that we formed up is led by myself, Kim Prather, a chemist here at UC San Diego and Scripps, Dan Can, a hydroclimate expert, also with USGS. And then we included the following folks. So myself, Kim, and Dan, we formed the steering committee for what we called CalWater 1, and I'll introduce that to you in just a moment. And then once that was completed, we realized that we had a much bigger challenge ahead scientifically, so we expanded that committee in 2012 to include Paul DeMott from CSU, Mike Dettinger from Scripps and USGS, Chris Farrell on air-sea interaction in particular at NOAA, Ruby Leung from PNNL, climate modeling and aerosols, Danny Rosenfeld, Steve Rutledge from Colorado State, Ryan Spackman from Science Technology Corporation, Dwayne Walliser, NASA JPL, and Alan White from NOAA, Earth System Research Lab in Boulder as well. And this cadre of people really crosses the disciplines of meteorology, atmospheric science, hydrology, and atmospheric chemistry. And aerosols was another major push in terms of our or major thrust of our effort. And here's a quick slide on the science gaps we were addressing, with a major goal of trying to get the influx of moisture into California from atmospheric rivers and the influence of transported or local aerosols on precipitation from the coast to the Sierra. And those two topics, aerosol impacts on precipitation and atmospheric rivers, came out of a workshop in 2008 here at Scripps, actually, with about 60 participants, and a number of different directions were considered, and these were the two that rose to the top, for which funding was then garnered. So one of the major thrusts in there is evolution and structure of ARs, including quantifying the terms in the water vapor budget, prediction of aerosol burdens and properties, a special emphasis on intercontinental transport, and then effects of climate variability and change on these phenomena. I don't have a slide on it, but I should mention that there is a modeling team, an observational team, and these hypotheses have been formulated in ways that involve both of those sort of scientific strategies. All right, how did we get to where we are now? It's been a fairly long road, starting it with that workshop I mentioned in 2008 at Scripps. And what you see here is a timeline from 2008 to 2018, so 11 years, and some major sort of milestones along the path to where we are today. And I'll just highlight a couple of those very briefly. The two foci were chosen in 2009. We had an early start field campaign in 2009 that was very lucky, I'll highlight in a moment. And then that extended, those type of data extended for 4 years. Then a second field season with an extension of those data, and then a third field season, which we brought much more of the facilities to bear. And that whole experiment, CalWater 1, really focused on the overland conditions in California. And you can see the analysis is ongoing. The decision was made then in 2012 to pursue what we call CalWater 2 now, which largely was designed to go after problems that involve offshore measurements as well as on land. And the steering committee formed up in 2012. We completed a white paper in 2013. We briefed a variety of agencies in D.C. in May 2013. In addition, we were leveraging a network of Mesonet of over 90 field sites in California that's now in place for the most part. It's about 90% done, that measures atmospheric river conditions and hydrologic conditions over on land, or hydrometeorological anyways. And then we had what we called early start activity in 2014 with the NOAA G4 and some Bodega Bay measurements of coastal field site with aerosols. And then we had a major CalWater 2 planning workshop that year, and then that followed with our CalWater 2015 field campaign joint with the ACAPEX experiment sponsored by DOE, and I'll go through that a fair bit. And there's a NOAA G4 proposed effort this winter in 2016, and that looks to be heading towards happening. And we had submitted as part of CalWater 2's vision a 5-year proposal for the NOAA G4, and it looks like we'll be 3 years into that 5 and each year having it, and with the possibility of additional ones. And then we've put this placeholder in. The steering committee feels that there's prospects for out years to have potential involvement from a more international community, and see if folks are interested in that. As you can see on the right there, we have had investments on the order of about $17 million with emphasis from NOAA, DOE, California Energy Commission, and NSF, and really split almost equally from between aerosols and ARs. All right, enough of the programmatics. Here we go to a little bit of the science. So the aerosol side of CalWater partly originated from an experiment sponsored by the California Energy Commission called SUPRECIP, which was led by Danny Rosenfeld, really looking at the boundary layer aerosols getting brought up into clouds over the Sierra, with the idea, of course, of too many aerosols, you reduce the droplet sizes and don't have the chance to grow to bigger drops. And then with pristine environments, lower CCN, you can actually get a greater chance of precipitation. And that a lot of work was done in the Sierra on that. And then the atmospheric river topic came out of NOAA work on NOAA's hydrometeorology testbed and scripts, and that's been a key topic, as you'll hear a lot more about here. And here's a nice example showing water vapor, integrated water vapor from satellite with this linear feature here. And effectively what's happening is the winds are blowing along that feature, transporting water vapor to the coast. All right, so a little bit more on the AR. Why is it an important topic? Here we have an example from December 2010 where over 25 inches of rain fell in Southern California, and we published that in 2012 in BAMS. And then the more important highlight I'd like to make is this figure down here. This is now from Dettinger and Kay in 2014, and it shows the precipitation in a key area of Northern California called the Delta Catchment. And the black curve is the 5-year running mean of the precipitation in that region. And the green curve is the running mean of, if you just took 95, if you eliminated the 5% wettest days each year, the green line is what you would get, which is pretty steady. The red line, however, is if you kept only the 5% wettest days, and you can see how it has these large variations which track pretty well with the overall variations. And in fact, 85% of the interannual variability in precipitation in Northern California is attributable to the variations in the 5% wettest days, by far the most of which are atmospheric river events. So the field campaign in CalWater 1, 2009 to 2011 is highlighted here with these orographic precipitation couplets in the rectangular boxes here, where we had aerosol measurements at the surface and meteorological measurements at the surface with radars looking upward. And then also did that in the Southern Sierra for 2 years. And then we had a scanning radar here in the Central Valley to end up with dual Doppler measurements connected with the NOAA NextRad radars. And we operated the NOAA or the DOE G1 aircraft with cloud microphysics measurements on it. One of the findings from CalWater's analysis, including data that came from before the field campaign itself started, had to do with the precipitation rate and amounts in storms hitting the coast. And what this shows is if we look at the total water vapor transport up a mountain slope in the coast range in atmospheric river conditions and compare it with the total precipitation during those storms. And by the way, we have definitions of AR conditions that allow us to define the start hour and end hour and the duration and calculate the water vapor transport using wind profiler measurements at the coast. We see that 75% of the variance in storm total rainfall is explained by variance in that upslope water vapor flux, which is essentially the strength and orientation and duration of the atmospheric rivers. The color in the dots is based on how long the AR lasted in hours, and the blue and green were the longest lasting. However, you can see clearly there's a lot of variability still in these big events, and aerosols may be part of that in terms of the microphysics. Of course, convection, frontal circulations, other dynamic forcings could also be a factor, because this is a very simplified analysis here, really just brute force looking at upslope water vapor flux and its very strong correlation with the precipitation. If we go ahead here, on the aerosol side, CalWater 1 helped us identify cases where we were able to find dust in evidence of dust from Asia in the precipitation samples collected in the Sierra. And with the vertically pointing precipitation radar co-located, we could identify what altitudes clouds were at during those events. In this particular case, published by Alt et al. In 2011, what we found is that this is time in this axis right here, about 2 or 3 days, and this upper area is where we use back trajectories to identify that those trajectories had gone back all the way over Asia to a region which is a climatological source of dust. And we actually found with chemical fingerprinting using an ATOF-MS system that Kim Prather leads, that there was evidence of that dust actually in the precipitation at the ground. So in a way we had the smoking gun. And this indicated to us that there was a potential for that Asian dust to enter the tops of the clouds, transform those clouds from liquid water to ice through the ice nucleation properties of some of that dust. and therefore increase the precipitation at the surface. And we had 2 atmospheric river events during that early start campaign in 2009 that had almost identical water vapor flux. The ARs were as similar to one another as any 2 I've seen in the more than a decade I've been studying these things. And the second storm produced 40% more precipitation with 2% difference in the water vapor flux up the slope. Excuse me. What that means is obviously something else is going on. There could have been other dynamical processes, et cetera, but this was the storm, the second one that was more productive in terms of precipitation, is the one that actually had the evidence of dust from Asia in it, with this mechanism of turning supercooled liquid into more precipitation-prone ice aloft. And now that was in 2011, and we followed that up with a paper by Creaming et al. In Journal Science, where we actually had a chance to fly an aircraft up in this, essentially this part of the storm, and actually collect in situ samples microphysically and aerosol-wise, essentially proving out that that concept is what we saw. And then we also now see evidence that these transports could go as far back as Africa. Here's the schematic from the Creaming et al. Paper in Science, and it brings in also 2 phases. One is prefrontal, one is postfrontal. Here we have the atmospheric river hitting shore here in this case and going upslope. And we also have a barrier jet, this brown thing I'll highlight in just a moment. And the atmospheric rivers we now know ride up and over the barrier jet. And that was one of the hypotheses we had desired to test in CalWater 1, and we've now proven that out, that the AR rides up and over the Sierra barrier jet and changes the precipitation distribution. But we also see now with the aerosol bit that these aerosols can come in at high altitudes, and this is in the postfrontal region, shows up even better. You see the aerosols coming in at high altitudes and transforming a supercooled liquid cloud into ice and enhancing precipitation. Let's continue now. This is the result on the Sierra barrier jet from the scanning radar. The left figure is the base map, and you can see the transect or the baseline of the scanning radar, which was located here, which did RHI scans to the southwest and to the northeast. And what you see here in the bottom right plot is from the southwest to the northeast, with the Doppler radar capabilities, we were able to see the Sierra barrier jet here in the green and yellow colors, which is flowing into the page. And then the red and purple is the atmospheric river flowing along the page up and over that barrier jet. And now we have multiple other data sets that show the same result. And this is clearly because you see the upward motion influence of the AR hitting the west edge of the barrier jet, it actually changes the precipitation distribution. And here's a schematic from Neiman et al., Monthly Weather View 2013, that shows that process from a 3D perspective. Here's the California coast. There's the San Francisco Bay Area. Here's the Sierra barrier jet flowing up into the Shasta Trinity Mountains, and the AR riding up and over that into the northern Sierra. So what this really has shown us is that the northern Sierra, its precip is driven largely by the AR, and the Shasta region up here is driven largely by the Sierra barrier jet. And there's an important rain gauge set that is used by water managers across California very heavily, called the 8-Station Index, Northern Sierra 8-Station Index. And here's the network of those stations. And what we're able to show now is that essentially 100% of the wettest days, the top 10 wettest days over the decade we studied, had both an AR and a Sierra barrier jet contributing to the precipitation. So this is now impacting what people are thinking about in terms of, what do we need to get out of our models on the mesoscale and how this can feed into forecasting. Okay, enough on the CalWater 1 results, and here we go into the CalWater 2 time frame, and I'll start basically with this point in time here, 2014, with what we call the CalWater Early Start effort. And here we see an AR hitting California, and it produced significant rainfall, up to 12 inches of rain. In some places that ended up being more than a third of the precipitation for the entire winter. And that happened in just about 2 or 3 days. And the Russian River here, which is experiencing drought, had its highest flow in over a year. And one of the interesting subjects we're working on is what we call a frontal wave. And you can see this arc here in the black curve represents what we now recognize as a frontal wave. And that has its own dynamics with different vertical motions from the frontal wave structure. It also has differences in the water vapor fluxes, and we wanted to measure that. So these white lines represent transects where we flew the NOAA G4 aircraft to try to measure in detail the vertical and spatial structures out here associated with this frontal wave. And this the frontal wave phenomena is particularly important because the geometry is such that for a given location on the coast, depending on whether there's a frontal wave or not, that location could end up having twice as long a duration AR conditions than if there's no frontal wave. Because essentially the AR in the synoptic system is moving to the east-southeast over time. But the frontal wave is moving up and along the front in time, and those two motions combine to cause the AR from a local perspective to look as if it's stalled. And that is what helps distinguish a run-of-the-mill AR that can produce beneficial water supply enhancements from a potential flood-producing AR. So these airborne measurements are key to taking a look at that offshore. By the time we get to 2015, we've lined up support from DOE through their ACAPEX program, and this aircraft was instrumented fully with aerosols and microphysics. The NOAA P3 with its tail Doppler radar, as well as dropsondes and other microphysics measurements, and the NOAA G4, mostly for the dropsondes, but also has a relatively new tail Doppler radar on it. In addition, there's a NSF-sponsored field site at Bodega Bay. Here you see a nice view of the compound there and its location adjacent to the coast. The UC San Diego lab run by Kim Prather. I mentioned hydrometeorology testbed earlier. There's a wind profiler out here that is part of that, and then also Colorado State University's mobile lab. And this operated for several weeks during the campaign, and about half of it has gone out again this year for another field campaign, and about half of it was there the year before in 2014 as well. And I want to highlight that's one of the things about CalWater. We've really taken a multi-year approach to this, recognizing that, first of all, weather might not be cooperative in one particular field season, and secondly, we could encounter very different conditions from one year to the next. Even if we get more or less what we're looking for in one season, we may see a broader range of conditions and therefore a better distribution of samples by having multiple seasons. And this points us towards, especially useful, are unattended measurements, remote sensing, unattended systems that don't require a lot of staff time. And then embedded in that long-term measurement approach is these higher, more intense field campaigns with aircraft and stuff. So here's the tracks and dropsonde locations for the flights with the NOAA G4 and P3 over the two winters of 2014 and 2015. And you can see how they tended to have this sort of northwest to southeast orientation. Those are because we're trying to cut across the ARs to measure their structure and their intensity better than has been possible historically. And we had all total about 30 flights and 500 plus dropsondes that have been deployed, and we're in the process of analyzing those, and I'll show you a taste of that in just a moment. Here's some photos from the DOE G1 aircraft, which flew many missions, and a few of them happened to be in, or were in AR conditions, and you can see the flooding here during this February 2015 event. We had the NOAA Ron Brown research vessel, and it carried these containers, our Department of Energy ARM mobile facility sensors, remote sensors in situ and the like. And here's the track of the Ron Brown. It encountered 4 days of continuous AR conditions here offshore, and then 3 days here right closer to shore with the event that made landfall. This facility has a wonderful data set for in situ measurements offshore. Part of it is a ocean surface interaction, air-sea interaction system run by Chris Farrell. And here you see the latent heat flux comparisons for different methods during the cruise over the period of about 25 days here. And that's just an example of the kind of measurements that are available. Here's a sample. I guess I repeated that here. But here's an example of the aircraft track across an AR here with the dropsondes in blue, and we had two legs there with the dropsonde. And one thing we've done with that now is combine the cases from CalWater 2014 and 15 with 6 cases that have been available from earlier studies using aircraft data to really provide the first ever comprehensive look at the strength of atmospheric rivers in terms of their water vapor flux. And by the time we finished CalWater 2015, we had 11 additional cases to add to those 6 earlier ones. So we basically tripled the sample size. And what this shows in the left is the domain of all these 17 different samples with aircraft drops on data. The color fill is the frequency of occurrence map for AR conditions offshore. This is the west coast right here. And this is a composite now of all 17 cases showing in color the integrated water vapor in the background. The dashed black contours are the integrated vapor transport, which is, by the way, the parameter we're heading towards more scientifically in the AR research field of focusing on more than just the water vapor itself. The integrated water vapor has a huge advantage, though, in that the SSMI satellite measurements, microwave, provide an independent observed observation of integrated water vapors, so we don't have to depend on a reanalysis and model. It's a very pure measurement. But it's really the water vapor transport that's important. And the black line represents a composite cross-section baseline where we are cutting across this composite AR to calculate what the water vapor transport looks like. So this is now from the cold side to the warm side. We've normalized all of those to a constant width of 860 kilometers is the mean width. And what we found is, and this is altitude up to 200 millibars, white is the upper level jet, the contours are isotax, color fill is vapor transport. A couple of key results is 75% of the total vapor transport occurs in the lowest 3 kilometers, so it's very much a lower tropospheric phenomena. 1% or less of the water vapor transport occurs above 7 kilometers, so the upper jet is really not a big player in the actual water vapor transport, even though when you look at satellite imagery like IR in particular, that's where you see the big sort of anomalies and signatures. That's a misleading kind of thing. The action's really down in the lower troposphere. And if we look at the average of all 17 of those events, an average atmospheric river transports 4.5 times 10 to the 8th kilograms per second, which is equivalent to roughly half of the discharge of all rivers globally. I should have mentioned early on that ARs carry out about 90% of the horizontal water vapor transport in the mid-latitudes, and on average there are 3 or 4 present at any one time in the mid-latitudes in the hemisphere. Just a quick snapshot, we had 4 aircraft and the ship all working together during one of our IOPs. Here's the integrated vapor transport heading towards the coast. We had a very good position for the experiment, and it included the NASA ER2 overflight along with the G1 and P3 and G4. And I'm just about to wrap up here with the last couple slides. This is now one of the modeling results looking at climate change intensification of horizontal water vapor transport in the CMIP-5 runs. And what this map here shows is the percentage IVT increase from the RCP 8.5 versus historical runs. And what you see is colors here that correspond on the order of 20 to 30% increases in horizontal vapor transport. And here's the information in terms of zonal averages from South Pole to North Pole, equator in the middle here. And you see the RCP 4.5 versus the RCP 8.5. And the point here that the models vary from 10 to 40% increase in December, January, February mean mid-latitude vapor transports. These are going to directly impact the intensity of the ARs and the precipitation associated with them. There's also a very clear signal in terms of the Arctic being where very large increases in horizontal vapor transport occur, and I would imagine are having a big impact on the regional climate there. So for more information on this, I want to highlight the CalWater overview article is available online as a BAMS online early release, and you can see the title there and the abstract. I just put those on for since this is going to go into some archive. And then I wanted to highlight that the result on the West Coast with regard to atmospheric rivers, here's an example from November 06 in integrated water vapor and in integrated vapor transport. There's also a published result of a published case of a Tennessee flood in May 2010, devastating, many lives lost, billions in damage, and it clearly had a strong atmospheric river contributing the water for that, the water vapor. And then maybe some folks have heard of the Snowmageddon storm on the East Coast in February 2010. It had a very well-defined AR feeding the moisture into it as well, and you can see that in the vapor transport here. So on the last slide here, I just want to highlight that we have a new center here at Scripps Oceanography on Western weather and water extremes, and we're having looking forward to a very wet winter this year. So thanks for your attention.